The new maid shows up wearing the necklace of the millionaire's late wife, and he demands to know how she got it. The shrill scream of a siren cut through the Saturday morning air in Boston and Massachusetts. Alexander Hartley, CEO of one of the country's largest technology companies, almost spilled his gourmet coffee when he was startled by the noise. He frowned, annoyed at the interruption to his meticulously planned morning routine. "Daddy? Daddy? Come and see!" The excited voice of his 8-year-old daughter, Olivia, echoed through the mansion. Alexander sighed, placing his cup on the marble kitchen table. He adjusted his silk tie and walked over to the panoramic living room window, where Olivia's face was practically glued to the glass. "What's so important, darling?" he asked, trying to keep his patience. "Look, there's a fire truck parked over there in the street." Olivia pointed, her eyes shining with excitement. Alexander looked outside and saw the huge red vehicle parked a few meters from his property. Firefighters were running around, unfurling hoses and shouting orders. The smoke rising from a nearby house explained all the commotion. "Well, it looks like someone's having a much worse day than me," he muttered to himself. "Can we go and have a closer look?" Olivia asked, her eyes pleading. Alexander hesitated. His instinct was to say no. After all, he had an important video conference in less than an hour, but something in his daughter's gaze made him reconsider. Since the death of his wife 2 years ago, he had been making an effort to be more present in Olivia's life. "All right," he conceded, but only for a few minutes. Olivia's face lit up with a radiant smile. She grabbed her father's hand and pulled him towards the door. As they left, the early summer heat enveloped them. The smell of smoke hung in the air, mingling with the scent of flowers from the impeccably tended garden. Alexander noticed the curious glances of the neighbors, who had also come out to observe the commotion. As they approached the scene, Alexander held Olivia's hand tightly, keeping her at a safe distance. The firefighters were working tirelessly to contain the flames that were consuming the small house. It was then that Alexander noticed something strange. A little girl who looked no older than 7 was sitting alone on the sidewalk across the street. Her brown hair was disheveled, and her clothes looked old and dirty. She watched the whole scene with an expression of curiosity mixed with fear. "Daddy, look at that girl," Olivia whispered, pointing discreetly. "She looks sad." Alexander frowned. "Don't point, dear, it's rude." But before he could say anything else, Olivia let go of his hand and ran towards the unknown girl. "Olivia!" Alexander called out, alarmed. But his daughter was already on the other side of the street. He crossed quickly, at his heart racing. When he reached the 2 girls, Olivia was already sitting next to the unknown girl, chatting animatedly. "Hi, I'm Olivia. What's your name?" The girl looked at Olivia with a mixture of surprise and caution. "Lucy," she replied quietly. "Do you live nearby, Lucy?" Olivia asked, her curiosity evident. Lucy hesitated for a moment before answering. "Sort of." Alexander watched the interaction with a mixture of concern and fascination. There was something about Lucy's appearance that bothered him. Her clothes were not only old, but looked as if they hadn't been washed for days, and there was a certain thinness to her face that didn't look healthy. "Olivia," he called softly, "we shouldn't bother. Perhaps Lucy's family is nearby and worried about her." Lucy lowered her eyes at the mention of family. Alexander noticed the gesture and felt a twinge of concern. "Are you here alone, Lucy?" he asked gently. The girl nodded without raising her eyes. Just then, one of the firemen approached the group. "Sir, do you know this child?" he asked Alexander. "No, we've just—" Alexander started to reply but was interrupted by Olivia. "She's my new friend," his daughter declared with conviction. The fireman frowned. "Well, we're trying to track down those responsible for her. Apparently, she was alone in the house when the fire started." Alexander felt a knot forming in his stomach. The situation was becoming more complicated than he had imagined. "Lucy," the fireman addressed the girl kindly, "can you tell us where your parents are?" Lucy remained silent, her eyes fixed on the ground. "She doesn't have any parents," Olivia said suddenly. All eyes turned to her. "She told me she lives alone," she continued, her voice full of innocence and concern. Alexander felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The implication of his daughter's words was disturbing. How could such a young child be living alone, and how long had this been going on? The fireman exchanged a meaningful look with Alexander. "Sir, if you could stay with the girl for a few minutes, I'll call social services." Alexander nodded mechanically, his mind still processing the situation. He watched the fireman walk away and then turned to the two girls. Olivia had taken Lucy's hand and was talking animatedly about her room and her toys, seemingly oblivious to the seriousness of the situation. "Lucy," Alexander said softly, crouching down to get level with the girls, "can you tell me a bit more about yourself? Where have you been sleeping? How long have you been alone?" Lucy raised her eyes slowly, meeting Alexander's gaze. There was a mixture of fear and resignation in her eyes that broke his heart. I sleep in different places," she mumbled, "sometimes in the abandoned house, sometimes in the park." Alexander felt a wave of compassion and horror. How could a child be living like this in the 21st century, in one of the richest cities in the country? "And how long have you been alone?" he asked, dreading the answer. Lucy shrugged. "I don't really know. Since Mom left." The simplicity of the answer hit Alexander like a punch in the gut. He looked at Olivia, who was now hugging Lucy protectively, and felt a mixture of emotions he couldn't name. "Daddy," Olivia said, her voice full of determination, "can we take Lucy home? She can sleep in my room. I can share my toys with her." His daughter's innocent proposal took Alexander by surprise. He knew it wasn't that simple. There were protocols to be followed, authorities to be notified, but something inside him stirred when he saw the instant friendship that had formed between the two girls. Before he could respond, the fireman returned accompanied by a middle-aged woman with a social services badge. "Mr. Hartley," the woman introduced herself. "I'm Patricia Moore from Social Services. I understand you found this girl." Alexander stood up, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "Yes, actually, it was my daughter who noticed her first." Patricia crouched down next to Lucy, speaking in a gentle tone. "Hello, Lucy. We're here to help you, okay? We'll find you a safe place to stay." The social worker's words, although well-meaning, seemed to frighten Lucy. She clung tighter to Olivia, who in turn looked at her father with pleading eyes. Alexander found himself in a dilemma. His rational mind knew that the standard procedure would be to leave Lucy in the care of social services. But his heart, that part of him that had become more sensitive since becoming a solo parent, hesitated. "Mrs. Moore," he heard himself saying before he had even fully processed his thoughts, What if Lucy stayed with us for the time being?" The proposal took everyone by surprise, including Alexander himself. Patricia looked at him with a mixture of surprise and caution. "Mr. Hartley, I understand your concern, but there are procedures to be followed. Lucy needs to be evaluated, and we need to investigate her family situation." "I understand," Alexander replied, surprised at his own determination, "but look at them. My daughter and Lucy have already formed a bond. Wouldn't it be better for Lucy to stay in a warm family environment while you carry out the necessary investigations?" Patricia seemed to ponder for a moment. She looked at the two girls, who were now holding hands, and then back at Alexander. "Mr. Hartley, your proposal is unusual but not unprecedented. We would have to make a quick assessment of your residence and family situation, and you would have to go through a temporary approval process as a temporary home." Alexander nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. "I'll do whatever it takes." The next few hours passed in a blur of forms, interviews and inspections. Alexander cancelled all his meetings for the day, focused entirely on the approval process. Olivia didn't leave Lucy's side for a moment, the two girls chatting and laughing as if they'd known each other for years. At the end of the day, exhausted but strangely satisfied, Alexander watched the two girls fall asleep on the sofa in the living room. Lucy, now clean and wearing clothes borrowed from Olivia, finally seemed at peace. As he looked at the two girls, Alexander couldn't help thinking about how his life had completely changed in a matter of hours. He, who always planned every minute of his day, had plunged headlong into an unpredictable situation. But when he saw the soft smile on Lucy's face as she slept, Alexander felt that, for the first time in a long time, he was doing something truly meaningful. And with that thought, he allowed himself to relax, knowing that the challenges ahead would be faced one day at a time. The morning sun filtered through the silk curtains of the guest room, where Lucy was sleeping soundly. Alexander Hartley was standing in the doorway, watching the girl with a mixture of concern and tenderness. It had been a week since he had made the impulsive decision to welcome Lucy into his home, and each day brought new challenges and discoveries. A light touch on his arm made him turn around. Olivia was standing there, still in her pajamas, her eyes shining with excitement. "Daddy, can we wake Lucy up? I want to show her the new game I won." Alexander smiled, stroking his daughter's hair. "Let her sleep a little longer, darling. Lucy's still getting used to the routine." Olivia gave a little peck of disappointment, but nodded. "All right, I'll wait for her in my room." As Olivia bounced away, Alexander couldn't help but reflect on how his daughter had blossomed over the last week. Lucy's presence seemed to have awakened in her a sense of responsibility and companionship that he had never seen before. Walking down the marble stairs towards the kitchen, Alexander was greeted by the aroma of fresh coffee and toast. Margaret, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for years, was preparing breakfast. "Good morning, Mr. Hartley," she greeted with a warm smile. "Are the girls up yet?" "Olivia is, but Lucy is still asleep," he replied, accepting the cup of coffee Margaret offered him. "How has she been behaving when I'm not around, Margaret?" The housekeeper paused, choosing her words carefully. "She's a sweet girl, Mr. Hartley, but sometimes I catch her looking at things in the house as if she doesn't believe she's here. And yesterday I found her stashing pieces of bread in her pocket after her snack." Alexander felt a tightness in his chest. Despite all his efforts to make Lucy feel at home, it was clear that the marks of his previous life were still deeply ingrained. "Thank you for telling me, Margaret. We'll keep working on it." Just then, the phone rang. It was Patricia Moore, the social worker responsible for Lucy's case. "Mr. Hartley, good morning. We have some updates on Lucy's situation that we need to discuss. Could you come by my office today?" The formality in Patricia's tone made Alexander straighten up in his chair. "Of course, Mrs. Moore. What time would be convenient?" After settling the details, Alexander hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. What would the social services have found out? Later that morning, after ensuring that Lucy and Olivia were well looked after by Margaret, Alexander drove to downtown Boston. Patricia Moore's office was located in an old but well-maintained building. "Mr. Hartley, thank you for coming so promptly," Patricia greeted him, indicating a chair in front of him. "We have some important information about Lucy's past." Alexander settled into his chair, preparing himself for what was to follow. "We've managed to trace Lucy's birth mother," Patricia began, her voice cautious. "Her name is Samantha Carter. She has a complicated history: child abandonment, substance abuse, petty crime." Alexander felt his stomach sink. Although he already suspected that Lucy's story was difficult, hearing the details was painful. "And where is she now?" he asked, dreading the answer. Patricia sighed. "That's the critical point, Mr. Hartley. Samantha was recently released from a rehabilitation center in Philadelphia, and she has expressed a desire to regain custody of Lucy." The news hit Alexander like a punch in the gut. In just 1 week, Lucy had become an integral part of his family. The thought of losing her to someone with such a troubled history made him nauseous. "But is that possible?" he asked, his voice betraying his concern. After abandoning Lucy for so long, Patricia leaned forward, her eyes conveying understanding. "It's complicated, Mr. Hartley. Legally, Samantha still has rights as a biological mother. However, Lucy's well-being is our priority. We will have to carefully assess Samantha's current situation and her ability to care for Lucy." Alexander nodded slowly, processing the information. "What about Lucy? Does she know about this?" "Not yet," Patricia replied. "We thought it best to discuss it with you first. Given the bond Lucy has developed with your family, we thought it might be best for you to broach the subject with her." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of legal details and procedures. When Alexander finally left the office, his mind was spinning with the implications of what he had discovered. Back at the mansion, Alexander found Lucy and Olivia playing in the garden. Seeing them together, laughing and carefree, made his heart squeeze. How could he tell Lucy about her mother without destroying the fragile sense of security she had begun to build up? "Daddy!" Olivia shouted, running towards him. "Come and see what we've done!" The girls had built a small house using cardboard boxes and old sheets. Lucy smiled shyly from behind Olivia, her eyes shining with a pride that Alexander rarely saw in her. "Wow, that's amazing!" he exclaimed, enthusiasm lacing his voice. "You two are top architects." As the girls pulled him aside to show him the rooms of their creation, Alexander couldn't help but notice how Lucy seemed more relaxed and confident. It was as if, in that little world of cardboard and imagination, she finally felt at home. In the evening, after putting the girls to bed, Alexander retired to his office. The conversation with Patricia still echoed in his mind. He knew he needed to make a decision about how to proceed, but every option seemed fraught with risk and uncertainty. Picking up the phone, he dialed a familiar number. "Hello, Rachel, it's Alex. Sorry to call so late, but I need your help." Rachel Foster was an old friend of Alexander's and one of Boston's most respected lawyers. If anyone could navigate the legal complexities of Lucy's situation, it would be her. "Alex, what's wrong? You sound worried." Rachel's voice sounded on the other end of the line. Alexander took a deep breath and began to tell the whole story. How Lucy had come into their lives, the quick attachment Olivia had developed for her, and, finally, the revelation about Samantha Carter. Rachel listened attentively, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. When Alexander finished, there was a moment of reflective silence. "Alex, I'm going to be honest with you," Rachel finally spoke. "This is a delicate situation. Legally, the birth mother has a strong claim, but the child's welfare is always the priority in the courts." "What do you suggest?" Alexander asked, feeling suddenly exhausted. "First, we need to gather all the information we can about Samantha Carter's current situation. Her progress in rehabilitation, her housing situation, employment, everything. At the same time, we must meticulously document Lucy's progress under your care." Alexander nodded, even though Rachel couldn't see him. "What about Lucy? How should I tell her?" Rachel paused, considering. "That's the tricky part. Lucy needs to know. But in a way that doesn't scare her or make her feel like she's being abandoned again. It might be useful to consult a child psychologist for advice on the best approach." The conversation continued for some time, with Rachel outlining the next steps and legal strategies. When they finally hung up, Alexander felt a little more centered, although still deeply concerned. Walking silently down the corridor, he stopped at the door to Lucy's room. The little girl was sleeping peacefully, cuddled up with the teddy bear Olivia had insisted on giving her on the first day. Alexander felt a wave of protection and affection wash over him. In just 1 week, Lucy had become an essential part of their lives. The thought of losing her was unbearable. "I'll fight for you, Lucy," he whispered softly. "I promise." Back in his room, Alexander knew that the days ahead would be challenging. He would have to navigate the legal, emotional, and ethical complexities of the situation. But looking at the photo of his late wife on the bedside table, he felt a renewed determination. "What would you do, my love?" he murmured to the photograph. Although no answer came, Alexander felt an inner peace settle over him. He knew that, no matter what happened, he would do what was best for Lucy. With that thought, he lay down, preparing himself for the challenges ahead. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Alexander Hartley's life had changed forever, and he was determined to face whatever lay ahead. Saturday morning dawned with a gentle summer breeze in Boston. Alexander Hartley watched the garden of his mansion through his office window, an untouched cup of coffee cooling beside him. His thoughts were far away, lost in the complexities of Lucy's situation and the difficult decisions he would have to make. A soft knock on the door brought him back to reality. "Come in," he called, turning to see who it was. Lucy entered timidly, her big brown eyes looking at Alexander with a mixture of affection and uncertainty. "Mr. Hartley? Olivia said you wanted to see me." Alexander felt his heart squeeze. After days of deliberation and consultations with Rachel and a child psychologist, he had decided it was time to tell Lucy about her mother. But now, seeing the little girl in front of him, so fragile and trusting, he hesitated. "Yes, Lucy," he said softly, indicating a nearby armchair. "Please, sit down. We have something important to talk about." Lucy settled into the armchair, her hands playing nervously with the hem of her t-shirt, a habit Alexander had noticed whenever she was anxious. "Lucy," he began, choosing his words carefully, "do you remember when we talked about how sometimes families can be different, how some children live with their parents, others with grandparents or uncles, and some, like you, sometimes need a temporary place to stay?" Lucy nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving Alexander's face. "Well," he continued, "recently, we found out some information about your family, about your mother, to be more specific." Lucy's body visibly tensed at the mention of her mother. Alexander resisted the urge to hug her, knowing that he needed to finish what he had started. "Your mother, Samantha, she's been through some difficult times, but now she's trying to improve her life, and she's expressed a desire to see you." Lucy blinked several times, as if trying to process the information. When she spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. She wants to see me, after all this time." Alexander nodded gently. "Yes, Lucy, but I want you to know that nothing will happen unless you want it to. Your opinion and your feelings are very important to us." Tears began to form in Lucy's eyes. "I don't know if I want to see her," she admitted, her voice trembling. What if she leaves me again?" Alexander's heart broke when he heard the fear in the girl's voice. He got up from his chair and knelt beside her, taking her small hands in his. "Lucy, listen to me. No matter what happens, you'll always have a home here with us. Olivia, Margaret and I, we're your family now too, and families take care of each other, no matter what." Lucy looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Then, without warning, she threw herself into Alexander's arms, sobbing against his chest. He held her tightly, feeling his own emotions threaten to spill over. Outside the office, Olivia peered through the crack in the door, her eyes wide with worry. She didn't fully understand what was going on, but she knew that her new friend was sad, and that made her uneasy. That afternoon, while Lucy rested in her room after the emotionally exhausting conversation, Alexander found himself on the phone to Rachel again. "How did she take it?" Rachel asked, her voice full of concern. Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It was difficult, Rachel. She's scared, confused. I can't blame her." "I understand," Rachel replied. "Alex, there's something else we need to discuss. Samantha Carter. She contacted my office." Alexander felt his stomach sink. "What does she want?" "She wants to arrange a meeting. With Lucy. And with you." The silence that followed was heavy. Alexander knew this moment would come, but the reality of it hit him full force. "When?" he finally asked. "She suggested next weekend, at a neutral location, supervised by social services." Alexander closed his eyes, trying to organize his thoughts. "All right, but on one condition. I want to meet her first, without Lucy. I need to be sure. I need to see for myself if she's really fit to be part of Lucy's life again." Rachel paused, considering the proposal. "That can be arranged. I'll get in touch with her lawyer and social services to organize everything." After hanging up, Alexander found himself walking towards Lucy's room. He stopped at the door, watching the little girl sleeping peacefully, cuddled up with the teddy bear Olivia had given her. The scene filled him with renewed determination. He would do whatever it took to protect Lucy, to ensure that she had the happy and safe life she deserved. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and preparations. Alexander divided his time between looking after Lucy and Olivia, managing his company and preparing for his imminent meeting with Samantha Carter. The day before the meeting, Alexander was in his office going over some documents when he heard a small commotion coming from the corridor. Curious, he got up to investigate. In the hallway, he found Olivia and Lucy, both in their pajamas, surrounded by a pile of books, blankets and pillows. "What's going on here?" he asked, a smile forming on his lips despite his concern. Olivia, ever the spokeswoman, replied promptly, "We're making camp in the hall, Daddy. Lucy said she's scared to sleep alone, so I thought we could sleep here together." Alexander's heart melted at his daughter's gesture. He lowered himself to the girl's level. "That's very kind of you, Olivia. Lucy, are you okay with this?" Lucy nodded shyly, a small smile playing on her lips. "Yes, Mr. Hartley. Olivia said that this way we can protect each other from nightmares." Alexander felt a surge of pride and love for his daughter. At times like this, he could clearly see his late wife's compassionate heart reflected in Olivia. "Well, in that case," he said, feigning seriousness, "I think we need more blankets and maybe some marshmallows to make this camp official. What do you think?" The girls' faces lit up at the suggestion. Soon, the hallway was transformed into a makeshift campsite, with Alexander sitting between Lucy and Olivia, telling stories and roasting marshmallows on a small electric fire that Margaret had found in the attic. As the girls finally fell asleep, Alexander lay awake, watching them. The contrast between the life Lucy had before and the one she had now was stark. And tomorrow, everything could change again. The next morning, Alexander prepared for his meeting with Samantha Carter with a mixture of apprehension and determination. He had asked Margaret to stay with the girls, vaguely explaining that he had an important meeting. The venue chosen for the meeting was a small cafe in downtown Boston, neutral and public enough for both parties to feel comfortable. Alexander arrived early, choosing a table in the corner that offered a clear view of the entrance. At 10 o'clock sharp, the cafe door opened and a woman walked in. Alexander recognized her immediately from the photos Rachel had shown him. Samantha Carter was a woman of medium height, with shoulder-length brown hair and the same expressive eyes as Lucy. There was a fragility in her posture, but also a determination in her gaze that Alexander couldn't help but notice. Samantha spotted him and walked towards him. Alexander stood up to greet her, extending his hand. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Alexander Hartley. Thank you for agreeing to meet me." Samantha shook his hand, her grip firm despite the slight tremor in her fingers. "Mr. Hartley, please call me Samantha, and thank you for looking after my Lucy." They sat down, an uncomfortable silence hanging between them for a few moments. It was Samantha who broke it first. "How is she?" she asked, her voice barely masking her anxiety. "Lucy, is she all right?" Alexander considered his answer carefully. "She's adjusting well. She's an incredible girl, Samantha. Strong, intelligent, compassionate." Tears formed in Samantha's eyes. I know I've made a lot of mistakes, but I'm trying to make things right now. I want to be the mother Lucy deserves." Alexander nodded slowly. "I understand, but I need to know, Samantha. What's changed? Why now?" Samantha took a deep breath, as if gathering her courage. "I went through an intensive rehabilitation program. I've been clean for 8 months now. I have a stable job, a small apartment, but most importantly, Mr. Hartley, I've finally understood how much I hurt my daughter, and I'm determined to make things right this time." The sincerity in his voice was palpable. Alexander felt his resolve waver slightly. He had hoped to find someone he could easily dismiss as unfit, but Samantha Carter was proving to be more complex than he had anticipated. "Samantha," he said calmly, "Lucy has been through a lot. She's only just beginning to feel safe and stable. Any changes in her life need to be carefully considered." Samantha nodded, tears running down her cheeks. "I know, and if I could go back, but I can't. All I can do now is move on and try to be better. For Lucy." The rest of the conversation was a mixture of difficult questions, emotional answers, and cautious planning. At the end of the meeting, Alexander found himself with conflicting feelings. On the one hand, he could see Samantha's genuine love for Lucy and her desire to make things right. On the other, he couldn't ignore the past and the potential risks to Lucy's well-being. As they said goodbye, Samantha asked one last question. "Mr. Hartley, when can I see Lucy?" Alexander hesitated for a moment before answering. "Let's take the next step carefully, Samantha. Shall talk to Lucy and our legal team. If she's ready, we'll organize a supervised meeting soon." Samantha nodded, gratitude evident in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Hartley, for everything." As Alexander drove home, his mind was filled with conflicting thoughts and emotions. Meeting Samantha had further complicated an already complex situation. He knew that the decisions they would make in the coming days and weeks would shape not only Lucy's future, but also that of his own family. As he entered the house, he was greeted by Lucy and Olivia's laughter coming from the garden. For a moment, he stopped, watching the two girls playing carefree. The scene reminded him of what really mattered in the midst of all the legal and emotional turmoil: Lucy's happiness and well-being. With a determined sigh, Alexander prepared himself for the challenges ahead. Whatever the outcome, he was committed to ensuring that Lucy's best interests were always the priority. The golden light of dusk bathed Alexander Hartley's office, casting long shadows across the room. He was sitting in his leather armchair, his eyes fixed on a framed photograph on his desk. The picture showed Lucy and Olivia smiling and carefree during a picnic in the garden the week before. The scene captured on paper contrasted dramatically with the tension that now hung over the Hartley mansion. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, straightening up in his chair. Rachel Foster, his longtime friend and lawyer, entered the room. Her usually composed face showed signs of concern. "Alex," she began, taking a seat in the chair opposite the table, "I've had a call from Samantha Carter's lawyer. They're pushing for a meeting between her and Lucy." Alexander took a deep breath, running his hand through his grey hair. "Already? But it's only been 2 weeks since our first meeting." Rachel nodded, her expression serious. "I know. They argue that Samantha has made significant progress and that postponing the meeting will only make things more difficult for Lucy in the long run." "And what do you think?" Alexander asked, valuing his friend's opinion as much as her legal advice. Rachel hesitated for a moment before answering. "Legally, they have a point. Samantha is Lucy's biological mother, and if she can prove that she is fit to care for her daughter, the courts tend to favor family reunification." Alexander felt a knot forming in his stomach. The thought of Lucy leaving her home, leaving Olivia, was almost unbearable. "But," Rachel continued, "Lucy's emotional well-being must be our priority. If we don't think she's ready, we can argue for more time." Alexander stood up, walking over to the window. Outside, he could see Lucy and Olivia playing on the swing he had recently installed. The girls' laughter came faintly through the glass, a bittersweet reminder of the happiness they had built up over the last few months. "Lucy has nightmares sometimes," he said softly, still looking out at the garden. "She wakes up calling for a mother who abandoned her. How can we expose her to more trauma?" Rachel joined him at the window, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Alex, I know you care deeply about Lucy, but we also have to consider that, if handled properly, this meeting could be a healing opportunity for her." Alexander turned to face his friend, his eyes reflecting the internal battle he was fighting. "What if it isn't? What if it hurts her even more?" "That's why we need to prepare her properly," Rachel replied. "I suggest we consult a child therapist, someone who can help Lucy process her emotions and prepare her for the meeting." Alexander nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in Rachel's advice. "All right, but I want to be present during the meeting. I'm not going to let Lucy face this alone." Rachel smiled softly. "I wouldn't expect anything different from you, Alex. I'll make the necessary arrangements." In the days that followed, the Hartley mansion became a whirlwind of activity. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a renowned child therapist, began making regular visits for sessions with Lucy. Alexander watched from afar, his heart squeezed, as Lucy slowly began to express her fears and hopes through drawings and therapeutic play. One afternoon, after one of these sessions, Dr. Rodriguez asked to speak to Alexander in private. "Mr. "Hartley," she began, her tone gentle but professional, "Lucy has made significant progress in recent weeks. She expresses a hesitant desire to see her mother, but is also afraid of being abandoned again." Alexander nodded, not trusting his voice to answer. "What worries me," the therapist continued, "is the attachment Lucy has developed for you and your daughter. It's wonderful that she's found a loving home, but we need to make sure she understands that seeing her mother doesn't necessarily mean leaving you." Dr. Rodriguez's words hit Alexander like a punch in the gut. He hadn't considered that his own attachment to Lucy might be complicating the situation. "What do you suggest?" he asked, his voice hoarse with restrained emotion. "I think the time has come to make the appointment," she replied softly. "But with carefully established conditions, a neutral, supervised environment, with you present to offer Lucy emotional support." Alexander closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When he opened them again, there was determination in his gaze. "All right, let's do it." The day of the meeting dawned clear and warm, a cruel contrast to the storm of emotions that was stirring in the hearts of everyone involved. Alexander helped Lucy get dressed, noticing how her small hands trembled as she buttoned up her favorite coat. "It's okay to be nervous, Lucy," he said softly, kneeling down to be at her eye level. "Remember what Dr. Rodriguez said. You can stop the meeting at any time if you feel uncomfortable." Lucy nodded, her big brown eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "Will you stay with me the whole time, Mr. Hartley?" "I promise," he replied, feeling his heart squeeze with the trust Lucy placed in him. The place chosen for the meeting was a small park in downtown Boston. A colorful playground stood out against the green of the trees, and wooden benches were scattered around, offering places to sit and watch. When Alexander and Lucy arrived, Samantha Carter was already there, sitting nervously on one of the benches. When she saw them, she stood up, a hesitant smile on her lips. Lucy squeezed Alexander's hand tighter, partially hiding behind him. Alexander could feel the tremor running through the girl's small body. "Hello, Lucy," Samantha said softly, her voice tinged with emotion. "You've grown so much." Lucy looked up, her eyes meeting her mother's for the first time in years. For a moment, no one moved, the air filled with tension and expectation. Then, to everyone's surprise, it was Lucy who took the first hesitant step towards her mother. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. Samantha knelt down, opening her arms but not moving to hug Lucy, respecting her daughter's space. "Can I give you a hug, sweetheart?" she asked, tears shining in her eyes. Lucy looked back at Alexander, as if seeking permission. He nodded encouragingly, although his heart was breaking as he watched the scene unfold. Slowly, Lucy approached Samantha, allowing her mother to wrap her in a hug. For a moment, mother and daughter clung to each other, years of separation and pain dissolving into silent tears. Alexander watched, feeling both an intruder and a protector. Part of him wanted to intervene, to protect Lucy from possible future disappointments, but he knew that this moment was necessary, both for Lucy and for Samantha. As the meeting progressed, the initial tension began to dissipate. Lucy, encouraged by Alexander's reassuring presence, began to open up more. She told Samantha about her new school, about Olivia, and about how she liked living in the Hartley mansion. Samantha listened intently, her eyes never leaving Lucy's face. From time to time, she cast grateful glances in Alexander's direction, silently acknowledging the role he had played in her daughter's life. As the two talked, Alexander couldn't help but notice the similarities between mother and daughter. The same shy smile, the same way of tilting their heads when they were curious about something. It was a painful reminder that despite all his efforts, he was not Lucy's biological father. As the afternoon progressed, Lucy began to show signs of tiredness. Alexander, noticing this, gently suggested that it was time to end the meeting. "Can we see each other again?" Lucy asked Samantha shyly. Samantha looked at Alexander, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded slightly. "Yes, dear," she replied to Lucy. "If you want, we can see each other again soon." As they said goodbye, Alexander noticed a subtle change in Lucy. There was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there before, as if an invisible weight had been partially lifted from her small shoulders. On the way home, Lucy was silent, looking out of the car window with a thoughtful expression. Alexander respected her silence, knowing that she needed time to process everything that had happened. Finally, when they had almost reached the mansion, Lucy spoke. "Mr. Hartley?" "Yes, Lucy. Can I still live with you and Olivia, even if I see my mother sometimes?" The question took Alexander by surprise, a lump forming in his throat. "Of course you can, Lucy. This is your home now, no matter what." Lucy smiled, looking relieved. "I'm glad because I love you too." Lucy's simple words hit Alexander with full force. He had to fight back the tears that threatened to fall. "We love you too, Lucy. Very much." When they arrived home, Olivia was waiting anxiously at the door. As soon as she saw Lucy, she ran to hug her friend. "How did it go? Are you okay? Do you want to play video games with me?" Lucy laughed, the musical sound of her laughter echoing through the entrance to the mansion. "Yeah, let's play." As the girls ran inside, Alexander stayed behind, watching them. The day had been emotionally exhausting, but seeing Lucy laughing and joking with Olivia brought a smile to his lips. He knew that the road ahead would still be complicated. There would be more meetings, more difficult conversations, more decisions to be made. But at that moment, seeing Lucy's happiness, Alexander felt a certainty solidify in his heart. No matter what the future held, he would do everything in his power to ensure that Lucy would always have a home full of love and security. With this comforting thought, Alexander entered the house, ready to join in the laughter and joy that now filled the halls of the Hartley mansion. Autumn had arrived in Boston, painting the trees in shades of red and gold. In the Hartley mansion, the changes of the season were reflected not only in the landscape, but also in the dynamics of the family that lived there. Alexander Hartley was sitting in his study, reviewing a pile of legal documents that Rachel had sent him. The papers detailed the possible scenarios for Lucy's future, from shared custody to full adoption. Each option brought with it a series of complexities and emotional considerations that made Alexander's head spin. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, expecting to see Margaret or one of the girls. To his surprise, it was Samantha Carter who entered, her face a mixture of determination and nervousness. Alexander stood up quickly, surprised by the unexpected visitor. "Samantha," he said, indicating a chair, "I didn't expect to see you today. Has something happened?" Samantha sat down, her hands restlessly in her lap. "I'm sorry to drop by unannounced, Mr. Hartley. I needed to speak to you in person." Alexander nodded, feeling a twinge of apprehension. Over the last 2 months, since their first meeting in the park, Samantha had maintained regular contact with Lucy through supervised visits and phone calls. Progress had been slow but steady. "What can I do for you?" he asked, keeping a neutral tone. Samantha took a deep breath before speaking. "I've been offered a job, a really good opportunity that could give me the financial stability to look after Lucy properly." Alexander felt his heart race. "That's great, Samantha. Congratulations." "Thank you," she replied with a small smile. "But there's a problem. The job is in New York." The silence that followed was heavy. Alexander processed the information, immediately understanding the implications. If Samantha moved to New York, would she take Lucy with her? "I know what you must be thinking," Samantha continued quickly, "and that's why I'm here. I don't want to take Lucy away from you and Olivia. You're her family now as much as I am, but I can't miss this opportunity either." Alexander leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with possibilities and worries. "What are you proposing, Samantha?" She hesitated for a moment before answering. What if Lucy stayed here with you during the school year and spent her vacations and some weekends with me in New York? I'd come and visit her whenever possible, of course." The proposal took Alexander by surprise. It was a solution he hadn't considered, one that could potentially meet the needs of everyone involved. But it also raised a number of new challenges and questions. "That's an interesting idea," he said carefully. "But we'd need to consider a lot of things: the emotional impact on Lucy, the legal implications, the logistics. Samantha nodded anxiously. I know it's complicated, but I thought that if we worked together, we could make it work. For Lucy. Alexander studied Samantha's face, seeing in it a mixture of hope and determination. He couldn't help but admire how much she had changed in recent months, the effort she was making to rebuild her life and her relationship with Lucy. I'll need to talk to Lucy about this, he said at last. And with my lawyer. But I think it's worth exploring the possibility. The relief on Samantha's face was palpable. Thank you, Mr. Hartley. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, after all, but thank you for considering it. As Samantha prepared to leave, Alexander stopped her with a question. Samantha, can I ask you something personal? She turned around, curious. Of course. What's changed? I mean, since you came back into Lucy's life, I see a completely different person from the one you described to me at first. Samantha smiled sadly. Honestly, it was seeing Lucy with you and Olivia, seeing how happy, safe, loved she was. I realized that if I really loved her, I needed to become someone worthy of being part of her life. Not just for her, but for myself too. Samantha's words struck Alexander deeply. He nodded, a new respect being born for this woman who was fighting so hard to redeem herself. After Samantha's departure, Alexander was faced with a difficult task: how to explain this potential new situation to Lucy. He decided that a direct approach would be best. That evening, after dinner, Alexander called Lucy for a private chat in the mansion's winter garden. The spot was one of Lucy's favorites, with its glass walls offering a panoramic view of the garden covered in autumn leaves. Lucy, he began gently, your mother visited me today. She has some news and some ideas about the future. Lucy looked at him with her big brown eyes, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension on her face. What kind of ideas? Alexander carefully explained the situation. Samantha's new job in New York, Lucy's proposal to stay in Boston during the school year and visit her mother on vacations and some weekends. As he spoke, he watched Lucy's reactions carefully. The girl remained silent for a long moment after he finished, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. I don't know, she finally said, her voice small. I want to see my mom more, but what if she leaves me again? And I don't want to leave you and Olivia. Alexander's heart squeezed at Lucy's words. He knelt down in front of her, taking her small hands in his. Lucy, listen to me. No matter what happens, you'll always have a home here with us, always. And your mother is working hard to be a better person for you, but the final decision is yours. If you don't feel comfortable with this idea, we'll find another solution. Lucy bit her lip thoughtfully. Can I think about it? Alexander smiled, proud of the maturity Lucy was showing. Of course you can, dear. Take your time. In the days that followed, the Hartley mansion was the scene of many emotional conversations and difficult decisions. Alexander consulted Rachel on the legal implications of the proposed arrangement, while Dr. Rodriguez continued her sessions with Lucy, helping her to process her emotions about the situation. Olivia, on hearing about the possibility of Lucy spending part of her time in New York, reacted with a mixture of sadness and determination. Can we visit her there? She asked Alexander. Maybe during spring break. Olivia's suggestion brought a smile to Alexander's face. That's a great idea, dear. Let's see if we can make it happen. Finally, after a week of reflection, Lucy came to a decision. She asked to speak to Alexander and Samantha together. The meeting took place in Alexander's office, with Lucy sitting between the two adults on the sofa. Her posture was upright, her face serious in a way that seemed out of place on someone so young. I've done a lot of thinking, she began, her voice trembling slightly, and I think I want to stay here at school and visit Mom in New York. Samantha let out a sigh of relief, tears glistening in her eyes. Alexander felt a lump in his throat, moved by Lucy's courage. But, Lucy continued, looking directly at Samantha, I need you to promise that you won't leave me again, that you'll be there when I visit. Samantha nodded fervently, taking Lucy's hands in hers. I promise, Lucy. I'll never disappear from your life again. I'm here to stay, no matter what." Lucy then turned to Alexander. "And you promise that I'll always be able to come back here, that this will always be my home too?" Alexander felt the tears he had been holding back finally fall. "Always, Lucy, always." The hug that followed was a tangle of arms and emotions, with Lucy at the center, finally feeling that she had not just one, but two families who loved her unconditionally. In the weeks that followed, a new routine began to take hold. Lucy continued her life in Boston, going to school with Olivia, taking part in extracurricular activities, and enjoying life at the Hartley mansion. But now, there were regular video calls with Samantha, planning visits to New York, and a general feeling that the future, although complex, was full of possibilities. Alexander observed all this with a mixture of pride and a twinge of melancholy. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, adjustments, and probably moments of doubt. But seeing Lucy's renewed smile, the way she talked excitedly about seeing her mother and at the same time planned activities with Olivia, he knew they had made the right decision. One night, while tucking Lucy into bed, she surprised him with a question. "Mr. Hartley, do you think I could ever call you Dad, even though I have my mother back?" Alexander felt his heart expand with love and gratitude. "Lucy," he said softly, "it would be the greatest honor of my life, and I'm sure your mother would understand. Families come in all shapes and sizes, and ours, well, ours is special." Lucy smiled, her eyes heavy with sleep. "Good night, Dad," she mumbled, before falling asleep. Alexander stood there for a moment, watching the girl who had transformed his life in ways he could never have imagined. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The love they had built was strong enough to overcome any challenge that lay ahead. With one last kiss on Lucy's forehead, Alexander quietly left the room, his heart full of hope for the new chapter they were about to begin. Winter in Boston arrived with unexpected ferocity, covering the city in a silent white blanket. At the Hartley mansion, preparations for the Christmas vacations were in full swing, but there was a tension in the air that not even the twinkling lights and festive decorations could completely dispel. Alexander Hartley was in his office, a cup of coffee cooling next to him as he scanned the plane tickets on his computer. It was the first time Lucy would be spending an extended period in New York with Samantha since the new arrangement had been set up. 2 weeks away from Boston, away from him and Olivia. A soft knock on the door brought him out of his thoughts. "Come in," he called, quickly closing the computer screen. Olivia entered, her eyes shining with a mixture of excitement and concern. "Dad, do you think Lucy will like the present I've chosen for her?" Alexander smiled, pulling his daughter close. "I'm sure she will, darling. What have you really chosen?" "A photo album," Olivia replied, snuggling into her father's arms. "With all our photos together, so she won't forget us while she's in New York." Alexander's heart squeezed at his daughter's words. It was clear that Olivia was also struggling with the idea of being separated from Lucy during the vacations. "That's very thoughtful of you, Olivia," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Lucy will love it, I'm sure, and don't worry, 2 weeks will fly by. Besides, remember we're having a video call on Christmas Day." Olivia nodded, looking a little more excited. "Can we help Lucy pack? I want to make sure she takes the coat we gave her for her birthday." Alexander laughed softly. "Of course we can. Why don't you call Lucy? We can make it a family activity." As Olivia bounced out of the office, Alexander allowed himself a moment's reflection. The last few months had been an emotional roller coaster for all of them. Lucy had adapted surprisingly well to the new arrangement, alternating between regular video calls with Samantha and occasional weekends in New York. But this would be the first time she had spent so much time away from Boston since she had become part of the Hartley family. Alexander was brought out of his thoughts by the sound of laughter coming from Lucy's room. He climbed the stairs, pausing at the door to observe the scene before him. Lucy and Olivia were sitting on the floor, surrounded by clothes and toys, arguing animatedly about what should and shouldn't go in the suitcase. "Lucy," he called softly, entering the room. "How's the packing process going?" Lucy looked at him with a smile, although Alexander could detect a shadow of anxiety in her eyes. "It's going well. Dad," she replied, still trying out the new word. But I don't know if I should take so many toys. Mom said she bought me some new things there. Alexander knelt down next to the girls, picking up a small plush bag that he knew was one of Lucy's favorites. How about we just take the special ones, like this one? Lucy took the bag, hugging it to her chest. Yes, this one definitely goes. As he helped the girls organize their bags, Alexander couldn't help but notice how Lucy oscillated between moments of excitement and anxiety. It was clear that she was excited to spend time with Samantha, but also fearful of leaving the safety and comfort she had found at the Hartley mansion. Lucy, he said gently, taking a seat on the bed and motioning for her to join him. It's all right if you're feeling a bit nervous about the trip. Lucy bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears. What if I miss you too much? What if Mom changes her mind and doesn't want me to come back? Alexander felt his heart break at Lucy's words. He pulled her into a tight hug, feeling Olivia join them without hesitation. Lucy, listen to me, he said firmly but gently. Your mother loves you very much. She's looking forward to spending time with you. And as for missing you, well, that's normal. We'll miss you too, but remember, you can always call us or make a video call if you need to. What about coming back? Lucy asked quietly. You'll always have a home here, Alexander reaffirmed. Always. That will never change. The words seemed to calm Lucy, who visibly relaxed in Alexander's arms. The day of departure came faster than either of them expected. Boston Airport was packed with holiday travelers, the air filled with a mixture of excitement and seasonal stress. Alexander held Lucy's hand tightly as they navigated their way through the crowd, Olivia walking closely on the other side. When they reached the boarding gate, he knelt down to be at Lucy's eye level. Remember, he said, adjusting Lucy's scarf, if you need anything at all, just call. Day or night? Lucy nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I'll call you every day, she promised. And don't forget to open our present at Christmas, Olivia added, giving Lucy one last tight hug. When the announcement for boarding sounded, Lucy hesitated for a moment before throwing herself into Alexander's arms. I love you, Dad, she whispered. I love you too, my little one, he replied, his voice tinged with emotion. Watching Lucy go through the boarding gate was one of the hardest things Alexander had ever done. He and Olivia stood there, waving until Lucy disappeared from sight. The next few days were a test of patience and trust. Alexander found himself constantly checking his phone, anxious for news of Lucy. The daily calls were a relief, but they also served as a bittersweet reminder of the distance that separated them. On Christmas Eve, the Hartley mansion seemed strangely silent, despite the festive decorations and the towering Christmas tree in the living room. Alexander and Olivia were sitting on the sofa, anxiously awaiting the scheduled video call with Lucy. When the laptop screen finally lit up with Lucy's smiling face, it was as if a weight had been lifted from Alexander's shoulders. "Merry Christmas!" Lucy exclaimed, her face beaming. In the background, they could see Samantha waving, a warm smile on her face. "Merry Christmas, darling," Alexander and Olivia replied in unison. The conversation flowed easily, with Lucy animatedly telling them about her adventures in New York, the lights of Times Square, the walk through snow-covered Central Park, the visit to Rockefeller Center to see the huge Christmas tree. "And Mom took me to see a musical on Broadway," Lucy said, her eyes shining with excitement. "It was amazing." Alexander felt a twinge of something, jealousy, fear, as he listened to Lucy talk so animatedly about her experiences with Samantha. But he quickly pushed these feelings aside, focusing on Lucy's obvious happiness. "That sounds wonderful, Lucy," he said sincerely. "We're so glad you're enjoying yourself." The conversation continued for almost an hour, with promises of more stories and photos when Lucy returned. When it was finally time to say goodbye, Lucy hesitated for a moment. "Dad," she called softly, "Olivia, I miss you. A lot." "We miss you too, Lucy," Alexander replied, feeling a lump in his throat. "But we're so proud of you, being so brave and enjoying your time with your mother." After they ended the call, Alexander found himself immersed in a storm of emotions. Joy at seeing Lucy happy and adapting well, pride in her resilience, but also a twinge of fear, What if Lucy decided she preferred to stay in New York permanently? Olivia, sensing her father's emotional turmoil, snuggled closer to him on the sofa. "Dad," she called softly. "Lucy's coming back, isn't she?" Alexander hugged his daughter tightly, finding comfort in her presence. "Yes, darling, Lucy will come back. She has 2 homes now, and that's a good thing. Hurt means she has twice as much love." The words, although intended to comfort Olivia, also served to calm Alexander's own worries. He remembered the countless conversations with Rachel and Dr. Rodriguez, all emphasizing the importance of supporting Lucy's relationship with Samantha, even if it meant moments of separation. That night, lying in his bed, Alexander reflected on how far they had all come, from a chance meeting in the middle of an emergency to a complex but loving family. The road hadn't been easy, and he knew there would still be challenges ahead. But seeing Lucy's beaming smile during the video call, hearing the joy in her voice as she recounted her adventures, he knew they had made the right decision. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. The love they shared, Alexander, Olivia, Lucy, and now even Samantha, was strong enough to overcome any obstacle. With this comforting thought, Alexander finally fell asleep, dreaming of the day Lucy would return home, bringing with her stories of their adventures and the love of 2 families united by one extraordinary little girl. Spring arrived in Boston, bringing with it not only the blooming of flowers, but also a series of changes for the Hartley family. Lucy's return from her Christmas vacation in New York had marked the beginning of a new phase in their lives, one that required balance, understanding, and above all, unconditional love. Alexander Hartley watched from his office window as Lucy and Olivia played in the newly flowered garden. The 2 girls, now aged 9 and 10 respectively, had grown so much over the last few months, not just physically but emotionally too. A gentle touch on his shoulder brought him out of his thoughts. It was Margaret, the housekeeper, with a worried expression on her face. "Mr. Hartley," she began hesitantly, "there's something I think you should know." Alexander turned around, his attention fully focused on Margaret. "What is it?" "It's about Lucy," Margaret continued. "Last night, after you had gone to bed, I found her crying in her room. She had just spoken to her mother on the phone." Alexander's heart squeezed. "Did she say the wrong thing?" Margaret shook her head. "Not exactly, but she mumbled something about not wanting to choose. I thought you should know." Alexander thanked Margaret and, as soon as she left, sank into his chair, his mind a whirlwind of worries. The last few months had been a delicate dance of co-parenting with Samantha. Although things had been working relatively well, it was clear that Lucy sometimes felt torn between her 2 worlds. Deciding it was time for a frank conversation, Alexander called Lucy into his office later that day. The girl entered, her eyes curious, but with a shadow of concern that did not go unnoticed by Alexander. "Lucy, darling," he began softly, motioning for her to sit down next to him on the sofa. "How are you feeling lately? With everything? School, your friends, your mother in New York?" Lucy hesitated, playing with the hem of her t-shirt, a habit Alexander knew indicated nervousness. Everything's fine, Dad," she replied, not very convincingly. Alexander put an arm gently around her shoulders. "Lucy, you know you can tell me anything, right? Even if you think it might make me sad or worried." The words seemed to open the floodgates. Lucy's eyes filled with tears, and within seconds, she was sobbing in Alexander's arms. I don't want to hurt anyone," she managed to say between sobs. "Mom wants me to spend more time in New York, but I don't want to leave you and Olivia. And sometimes, when I'm in New York, I miss here. But when I'm here, I miss there, and I don't know what to do." Alexander felt his heart break as he listened to Lucy's torment. He hugged her tighter, letting her cry until her sobs subsided. "Lucy, my love," he said softly, "I want you to understand something very important. You don't have to choose. Your heart is big enough to love all of us, me, Olivia, your mother, and we all love you too much to want you to feel torn apart like this." Lucy looked at him, her eyes still shining with tears. "But what if I disappoint someone?" Alexander smiled gently. "You would never disappoint us by loving. In fact, I'm very proud of you for having so much love to give." The words seemed to calm Lucy down a little, but Alexander knew that the situation required more than just comforting words. Over the next few days, he contacted Samantha, Rachel, and Dr. Rodriguez to discuss how they could improve the situation for Lucy. A week later, Alexander organized a video call with everyone involved. Him, Samantha, Lucy, and even Olivia. Dr. Rodriguez was present as a mediator. "Lucy," Samantha began, her voice full of emotion. "I'm so sorry if I made you feel pressured. I love you so much and I just want to spend time with you, but never at the expense of your happiness." Alexander nodded in agreement. "We all want what's best for you, Lucy, and that means finding a balance that works for everyone, especially you." With Dr. Rodriguez's gentle guidance, they spent the next few hours openly discussing their feelings, fears, and hopes. Lucy, encouraged by everyone's support, expressed her desire to maintain a more consistent routine with regular visits to New York, but without drastically interrupting her life in Boston. "What if," Olivia suggested shyly, "sometimes I could go to New York with Lucy? Then she wouldn't have to feel torn between her friends here and there." Olivia's suggestion was met with warm smiles from all the adults. It was a powerful reminder of how love and understanding could come from the most unexpected sources. By the end of the call, a new plan had been hatched. Lucy would spend most of the school year in Boston, with monthly weekend visits to New York. During the summer break, she would spend a whole month with Samantha, with Olivia joining her for a week. In addition, Samantha would make more frequent visits to Boston, allowing her to become more involved in Lucy's daily life without causing too much disruption. Over the next few months, the new routine began to take shape. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of longing, frustration, and adjustment, but there was also a palpable sense of relief, especially for Lucy. One summer afternoon, as Alexander watched Lucy and Olivia swimming in the mansion's pool, Samantha, who was visiting for the weekend, joined him on the balcony. "She looks so happy," Samantha commented softly, her eyes fixed on Lucy. Alexander nodded. "She is. We're all learning and growing together." Samantha turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Alexander, I want to thank you for everything you've done for Lucy, for being the father she needed when I couldn't be there." Alexander felt a lump in his throat. "Samantha, Lucy brought us so much joy. I should be thanking you for giving us the chance to love and care for her." The two of them were silent for a moment, watching the girls play. It was a scene that, a few years ago, neither of them could have imagined. Two families, once separated by circumstances and difficult choices, now united by their love for an extraordinary little girl. "You know," Samantha said after a while, "when I was at rock bottom, the idea of Lucy finding a loving family was what gave me hope. I prayed that wherever she was, she would be loved and cared for. I never imagined that this wish would come true in such a beautiful way." Alexander smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it? Who knew that an emergency on a Saturday morning would change our lives forever? At that moment, Lucy came out of the pool, running towards them with Olivia right behind. "Dad, Mom, come and swim with us." Alexander and Samantha exchanged a look of mutual understanding before joining the girls. As they played in the water, laughing and having fun together, Alexander couldn't help but think about how his definition of family had expanded and evolved. It wasn't always easy. There were challenges, moments of doubt and occasional conflicts, but seeing Lucy's beaming smile, the genuine friendship between her and Olivia, and the mutual respect he and Samantha had developed, Alexander knew they were on the right track. In the evening, after the girls had gone to bed and Samantha had retired to the guest room, Alexander stood alone on the balcony, gazing at the stars. He thought of his late wife, how she would have adored Lucy, how proud she would have been of the family they had become. With a serene smile, Alexander entered the house, grateful for the unexpected gift that fate had given them, an unconventional family, united by love, compassion, and the courage of a little girl who had touched their hearts in ways they could never have imagined. Autumn had arrived again in Boston, painting the trees in shades of red, orange and gold. At the Hartley mansion, preparations for a special celebration were in full swing. It was Lucy's 13th birthday, a significant milestone not only for her entry into adolescence, but also because it represented 5 years since she had entered the Hartleys' lives. Alexander Hartley was in his office, going over the last details of the party. The guest list included not only Lucy's friends from Boston, but also some from New York, including, of course, Samantha. The last few years had been a journey of growth, adaptation, and above all, love. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," he called. Lucy entered, now a graceful pre-teen, her eyes shining with the same curiosity and joy that Alexander remembered from the day he met her. "Dad," she began, taking a seat in the chair opposite his desk. "Can I ask you something?" Alexander smiled, noticing how nervous Lucy looked. "Of course, dear. What is it?" Lucy took a deep breath before continuing. "I was thinking. Well, I talked to Mom about it too, and she agreed that it would be a good idea, but I wanted to know what you thought." Alexander waited patiently, knowing that Lucy sometimes needed time to organize her thoughts. "I was wondering if we could make it official," she finally said. "You adopting me, I mean..." The surprise must have been evident on Alexander's face, because Lucy quickly continued, "Not that it changes how I feel about you or Mom. You're both my parents, but, well, legally, you're still my guardian, not my adoptive father, and I wanted it to be official." Alexander felt a lump forming in his throat, emotion overflowing his chest. "Lucy," he said softly, "nothing could make me happier. But are you sure it wouldn't change your relationship with your mother?" Lucy shook her head, a smile forming on her lips. "No, it wouldn't. Mom and I talked about it a lot. She said she understands and supports my decision. She said that you deserve this recognition for the incredible father you've been to me." Alexander rose from his chair, reaching around the table to embrace Lucy. "My dear," he said, his voice breaking with emotion, "it would be an honor to officially adopt you." The day of the birthday party arrived, bringing with it an explosion of color, laughter, and music to the Hartley mansion. The garden had been transformed into an autumn fairy tale, with lanterns hanging from the trees, tables decorated with golden leaves, and an impromptu dance floor by the pool. Lucy was radiant in a sky-blue dress, her brown hair tied up in an elaborate braid made by Olivia, who at 14 had become an expert hairstylist. The two girls, now teenagers, were as close as sisters. Samantha arrived early, helping with the final preparations and exchanging complicit smiles with Alexander. The years of co-parenting had forged a mutual respect and genuine friendship between them. As the guests began to arrive, the party came alive. Teenagers laughed and danced, adults chatted animatedly, and the atmosphere was one of pure joy. At the center of it all was Lucy, her eyes shining as she moved between her friends from Boston and New York, two worlds that now coexisted harmoniously in her life. At the moment of the cake, Alexander asked for everyone's attention. With Lucy at his side and Samantha at the other, he cleared his throat, feeling the weight of the moment. 5 years ago, he began, our family changed forever when a little girl came into our lives. "Lucy," he turned to her, "you have taught us more about love, courage, and resilience than we could ever have imagined. And today, on your 13th birthday, we have a special announcement to make." Lucy smiled, taking Alexander's hand and Samantha's. "With Samantha's full support," Alexander continued, "and Lucy's express wish, we are happy to announce that we will be starting the official adoption process." There was a moment of surprised silence, followed by an explosion of applause and congratulations. Olivia was the first to react, rushing to hug Lucy and Alexander. "That means you're officially going to be my sister," she exclaimed, tears of happiness in her eyes. Samantha approached, hugging Lucy tightly. "I'm so happy for you, my love," she said softly. "You deserve all the happiness in the world." The party continued into the night, now with an added layer of celebration. As the guests danced and enjoyed themselves, Alexander found himself in a moment of reflection, observing the scene before him. He saw Lucy, laughing with her friends, moving confidently between the Boston and New York groups. He saw Olivia, now a young woman, looking after the younger guests with a grace reminiscent of his late mother. She saw Samantha, chatting animatedly with other parents, totally at ease in the house she once feared would steal her daughter from her. Rachel, who had become not only the family lawyer but a close friend, approached Alexander with a glass of champagne. "Congratulations, Alex," she said, toasting him. "You've built something really special here." Alexander smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. "Thank you, Rachel, for everything. We wouldn't have gotten here without you." Rachel shook her head, smiling. "You would have found a way. Love always does." Later that evening, as the party began to wind down and the guests were leaving, Alexander found Lucy sitting alone by the pool, watching the moon's reflection in the water. "Hey, birthday girl," he said softly, taking a seat next to her. "What's up?" Lucy smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Better than fine," she replied. "I'm happy, really happy." Alexander kissed the top of her head. "I'm glad to hear that, darling." They sat in silence for a moment, enjoying the stillness of the night. "You know," Lucy began, her voice thoughtful, "sometimes I think about how my life could have been different. If you hadn't found me that day, if Mom hadn't come back, if—" Alexander hugged her tighter. "It's natural to think about these things, Lucy. But the important thing is where we are now." Lucy nodded. "I know, and I'm grateful for everything. For you, for Olivia, for Mom, for this family we've built." At that moment, Olivia and Samantha joined them, each bringing a cup of hot chocolate. "Hey, you two," Samantha said with a smile. "We thought you might like that." The four of them settled down together, sharing laughs and memories as the evening progressed. Alexander looked at each of them. Lucy, the girl who had stolen his heart in a moment of crisis. Olivia, his daughter who had embraced change with a maturity beyond her years, and Samantha, who had become not just a co-parent but a friend. He thought of his late wife and how much she would have loved to see this unconventional family, united by love and a determination to make it work. "You know," Alexander said, breaking a moment of comfortable silence, "I think we should make a tradition out of it." "What?" Olivia asked curiously. "This," he gestured to all of them, "the four of us, together, celebrating not just birthdays, but our family, our journey." Lucy smiled brightly. "I'd love that," she said, looking at Samantha for approval. Samantha nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's perfect," she agreed. As the moon rose higher in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the garden, the Hartley family, now expanded and redefined, stood together, celebrating not only Lucy's birthday, but the love that had brought them there and would continue to guide them in the future. Alexander knew that there would still be challenges ahead. Lucy and Olivia's teenage years would bring new complexities, and the family dynamic would continue to evolve. But looking at the smiling faces around him, he felt a deep certainty. Together, they could face anything. The journey that had begun with a chance meeting on an emergency day had led to this. A family united not by blood, but by love, understanding, and the courage to embrace the unexpected. And as the night sky filled with stars, Alexander Hartley knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together as the family they had become.